The sky over Velthra burned orange with fire and smoke. The great cities of the Zalari Confederation, once shimmering with crystal towers and floating gardens, were reduced to broken glass and piles of ash. Their enemies, the Drek Empire, had come faster and harder than anyone expected. First with diplomacy, then deceit, and finally with a wave of brutality that crushed resistance like insects beneath a war machine. Commander Rel Tharn stood at the edge of what was once the Grand Plaza. His armor, once polished silver, was dented and blackened. Blood, his own and others, stained the joints. His people, the Zalari, had never been warriors. They were thinkers, builders, artists. They had no armies when the first dreadships arrived, only fleets meant for transport, not combat. The Drek laughed as they conquered city after city, taking pleasure in every slaughter. Rel had seen too much. In 2 solar cycles, they had lost 80% of their world. Their High Council was dead. Their capital had fallen 3 weeks ago. And now, only scattered bands like his, tired, starving, barely armed, remained. "We'll make our last stand here," he told the 50 remaining fighters around him. Their eyes, dim and defeated, didn't even question it. They knew it was over. From the ruined sky above came the sound of more dropships, heavy metal beasts that howled as they descended. Drek reinforcements. Rael tightened his grip on the battered plasma rifle he had taken from a dead soldier. "No running," he said. "We make them bleed." Then something strange happened. Another ship descended, but this one was different. It was sleek, black, marked with symbols none of the Zalari recognized. It wasn't Drek. It didn't carry the bone-colored war design of their empire, and it was coming down fast, almost recklessly. Rel ducked instinctively as the ship landed hard, cracking the scorched earth beneath. For a second, nothing happened. His fighters were frozen, confused. Was it a new enemy? A new horror? Then the door opened. They were tall, taller than Zalari, clad in armor that hissed with energy, their helmets reflecting the burning light. They walked like predators, deliberate, confident. And one by one they emerged, 12 in total, carrying weapons heavier than anything the Zalari had ever built. Rel raised his rifle halfway, confused. Then one of them spoke. "Which of you is in command?" The voice was rough, low, and translated into perfect Zalari dialect. Rel blinked. I am." The figure stepped closer, removing his helmet. His skin was brown, his eyes hard and focused. A scar ran across his cheek, and his expression said one thing clearly. "This isn't our first war." "I'm Captain Marcus Hale," he said. "Earth Command received your distress signal. Sorry we're late." Rel just stared. "You're human?" "Damn right," Marcus said. He turned to the others. "We've fought the Drek before. We'll show you how it's done." And then, before Rel could say a word, the human soldiers fanned out like shadows, taking positions with machine-like discipline. One knelt beside a wounded Zalari and injected him with a stimulant. Another set up a turret facing the direction of the incoming Drek. Rael's comlink crackled. A scout reported dozens of enemy dropships incoming. But for the first time in months, Rael didn't feel panic. He felt something else. Hope. Marcus looked at the sky and smirked. "They're coming. Good. I was getting bored." Then he gave the order. "Light 'em up." And the world changed. The first Drek dropship didn't even have time to fully deploy its claws before it exploded mid-air. A direct hit from the human turret turned the enemy vessel into a fireball, its shredded parts raining down over the shattered plaza. Rel ducked as debris flew past his head, watching in awe as the humans sprang into action like they were born for this moment. Marcus barked quick orders, his voice steady, sharp, and commanding. The rest of his squad moved without hesitation, setting up crossfire lanes, boosting weak shield lines and reinforcing cover points that the Zalari hadn't even considered usable. These humans weren't just soldiers. They were war. The second dropship came in low, avoiding the same fate as the first. It hit ground hard, metal legs slamming into the rubble as the Drek poured out. Tall, armored, vicious. Their screeches echoed across the ruined city, the noise curdling like acid in Rel's ears. But the humans didn't flinch. Private Naya Kess, a small woman with dark braids coiled beneath her helmet, lobbed something silver and blinking into the crowd of Drek. There was a flash, no fire, no blast, just a deep thump. And suddenly, the Drek started convulsing. Their armor stiffened, their weapons dropped, and one by one they crumpled like puppets with severed strings. "EMP shock grenade," she said, grinning as she turned back to Rel. "Rips through their nerve tech. They still haven't figured out how to shield it." Rel watched the Drek writhe and fall. He'd fought them for months, seen friends torn in half, seen children burned alive. And yet here these humans were, neutralizing them like they were pests. Another enemy squad charged, roaring, from the eastern flank. The humans didn't move from their position. Instead, Sergeant Barlow activated something from his wrist. A sound wave burst outward, and suddenly energy shields blinked to life in a perfect semicircle. The Drek's plasma fire bounced harmlessly off it. Barlow raised his rifle and fired 3 precise bursts. 3 Drek dropped. Reel barely realized his mouth was open until he caught Marcus watching him. The human captain raised an eyebrow. "You just gonna stand there, or are you gonna fight?" Yes," Rel snapped to attention. He turned to his remaining Zalari fighters. "Form up, support the humans, aim for the gaps in the Drek armor, let them lead." And just like that, the tide began to turn. The Drek weren't used to resistance. They had been winning for too long, too easily, but now they were stumbling, retreating, snarling in frustration as wave after wave of their assault was turned back. The plaza that had once been a slaughterhouse was now a battleground, and for the first time in memory, it wasn't the Zalari dying in droves. It was the Drek. By the second hour of fighting, more human ships were arriving, sleek black falcons that rained fire from above. Human medics began treating wounded Zalari, their equipment clean, fast, and efficient. Drones buzzed overhead, mapping terrain and broadcasting enemy locations to Marcus's tactical visor. The humans had brought war, but not chaos. They brought order. They brought fire with purpose. And they brought vengeance. As night fell, Rel sat against a crumbled statue of the old builders. His armor was even filthier than before, but his limbs no longer shook with fear. His body ached, but he could still move. He had lived. They all had. Across the square, a small bonfire crackled. Human soldiers sat beside Zalari, sharing dry rations and awkward, tired laughter. Marcus approached, dropping beside him. "You fought well today," the human said. "So did you," Rel replied, still half in disbelief. "You didn't have to come?" Marcus stared out at the horizon, at the silhouette of a broken city far away. "Yeah," he said quietly. "But we remember. We remember what the Drek did to the Valari, to the Umen. No one came for them. We swore we'd never let that happen again." He turned to Rel, eyes cold and burning. "We may be late, but when humans show up, we don't back down." Rel nodded. "I believe that now." Marcus stood and walked back to his men. The wind shifted. Somewhere far in the distance, Drek ships regrouped, howling in rage. But tonight, they were the ones afraid, because humanity had arrived. And they were just getting started. The days that followed felt like living inside a storm that had suddenly, violently changed direction, Where once the Zalari ran, scattered, and buried their dead in silence, now they marched with purpose beside humans who fought like demons and strategized like war gods. The humans called it Phase 1, stabilization. That meant holding what little ground the Zalari still had and pushing the Drek back inch by bloody inch. It wasn't glamorous. It was grinding, brutal work. Trench fights, ambushes in ruined cities, sniper nests inside collapsed temples. But every day they held, every day they didn't die, was a kind of miracle. Rel stood beside Marcus on a broken balcony overlooking the remains of Mir Zeth, once a proud Zalari city of culture and history. Now it was a maze of fire-gutted buildings and streets littered with bones. A week ago, it had belonged to the Drek. Now it was the forward line. Their patterns are changing, Marcus muttered, eyes glued to his tactical display. They're falling back faster than they used to. Rel frowned. That's good, isn't it? Marcus didn't look convinced. They're not scared. Not really, not yet. They're regrouping, planning something bigger. They've realized we're not here to lose. He turned to relations, and that's when they get dangerous. That same night, as the Zalari slept in makeshift shelters and the humans rotated their watch, something began to change in the air. The silence between bombardments was deeper. The usual Drake reconnaissance drones, buzzing mechanical wasps that had harassed them for days, vanished. It was too quiet. And then, just before dawn, it happened. The sky screamed. Huge Drek warships, 3 times the size of the ones before, punched through the clouds like gods hurling spears. They weren't dropships. These were siege class. They didn't carry soldiers. They carried death. The first beam struck the northern ridge, vaporizing everything for a quarter mile. Screams ripped through the comms. A second beam landed near the riverbed, turning the water to steam in a heartbeat and killing dozens, Zalari and human, instantly. Alarms howled. Rail grabbed his rifle and sprinted toward command. Soldiers ran past him in every direction. Fires lit up the horizon. It was chaos, like the war had restarted all over again, only worse. At the command hub, Marcus was already shouting into comms. I want Falcon batteries on Grid 9B now. Get those goddamn rail cannons in the air. Reel, get your people underground if they're not already. What is that? Rel shouted over the noise. We've never seen those ships before. Marcus's face was grim. Siege cruisers. The Drek usually save them for extermination. They've decided you're not worth enslaving anymore. Rel's blood ran cold. They're going to wipe us out. Unless we hit them first, Marcus snapped. We've got one chance. He pointed to a blinking map. Each cruiser's got a central plasma core. We take that out, the whole thing goes. We'll need to board one, sabotage it from the inside. Board that? Rel asked, stunned. That's suicide. Marcus grinned, teeth white in the flickering red light. Not suicide, he said. Human strategy. By sunset, the plan was in motion. One human dropship, barely large enough to carry a dozen, would fly low through the rubble, using the chaos as cover. They'd sneak beneath the cruiser's scanners, latch onto its belly like a parasite, and cut their way inside. Rel volunteered before he even knew what he was doing. Marcus gave him a long look. You sure? You've got people who still need you. Rel nodded. Which is exactly why I'm going. They left at twilight. Inside the tight cabin, Rel sat between human soldiers, silent, armored giants loading their weapons with a calm that both terrified and reassured him. One of them passed him a device. C4, don't drop it, the soldier said flatly. Another grinned. First time blowing up a warship? Rel exhaled slowly. First time surviving long enough to try. They all laughed, a short, bitter laugh that smelled of blood and adrenaline. As they ascended into the fire-lit sky, The cruiser above loomed larger and larger until it blocked out the stars. Its underside opened like a steel maw, glowing with heat, trembling with power. Marcus's voice crackled through their earpieces. "Remember what they did. Remember who you are, and make them bleed." The dropship accelerated, straight into the monster's jaws. The moment the dropship latched onto the cruiser's underbelly, everything went still, like the universe had paused to take a breath before something terrible happened. Inside, the lights flickered red. Everyone held position. The magnetic clamps hissed, locking them in place. Above them, just a few meters of reinforced Drek alloy separated the team from the core of a warship, designed to burn cities to ash. "Cutting hull now," Sergeant Barlow muttered, activating a thermal lance. A thin beam of white-hot energy shot upward, melting a perfect circle into the cruiser's gut. Liquid metal dripped down the sides as smoke filled the dropship, making it feel more like a coffin than a vehicle. Reel's heart hammered in his chest. He clenched his jaw and checked his plasma rifle for the third time. He wasn't a commando. He was a civic planner before the war. He'd spent more time designing irrigation systems than holding a gun. But now? Now he was boarding a death ship with human soldiers like it was just another Thursday. The hull opened with a wet groan, and Marcus was the first through, swinging up and vanishing into the darkness above. One by one, the rest followed, until only Rel remained. He hesitated for half a second, then climbed through the melted hatch. Inside, it was hell. The Drek ship's interior pulsed with a sickly red glow. Pipes hissed steam. The walls looked alive, veined with strange organic wiring and glowing fluid that moved like blood beneath metal skin. Marcus gave hand signals, and the squad moved in silence, hugging the curved corridors. The sound of distant Drek voices echoed faintly, deep, guttural tones like gravel being crushed. They hadn't been detected. Yet. Rail tried not to look at the alien walls. Every surface felt wrong, like it was watching them. Twice he stepped in puddles that felt warm, like living things had been bled here. After 10 minutes of tense movement, they reached the core chamber, a massive vertical cylinder thrumming with contained energy. It glowed blue at the base, bright enough to cast dancing shadows over their faces. This was the heart of the beast. If it blew, the entire ship would go down in a glorious fireball. But it wasn't unguarded. 3 Drek enforcers stood in the chamber, bigger than normal infantry, heavily armored, and mean-looking. One turned, snarled, and all hell broke loose. Marcus opened fire first, 2 shots straight to the head of the nearest one. It barely staggered. Barlow launched a grenade that bounced once before detonating mid-air, throwing up a wall of flame. The blast caught one Drek fully in the chest, blowing it back into the reactor wall. Reel fired blindly, ducking behind a pipe as the air filled with screams, gunfire, and the high-pitched whine of plasma charges. One of the Drek swung a heavy blade down, cleaving through the cover just inches from Rel's head. "Move!" Marcus shouted, tackling the beast from the side, jamming his blade through the joint of its armor. The Drek screeched and threw him off, but it gave Rel the opening he needed. He raised his rifle and emptied the charge directly into the creature's throat. It dropped like a collapsing building. Silence returned, slowly, like it had to claw its way back in. 2 humans were down. Barlow had a long gash down his arm but was still standing. Reel's hands were shaking so hard he nearly dropped his weapon. Marcus grabbed the explosives case, tossed it open, and handed Rel a set of charges. "Set them on the coolant lines. They're exposed. If we rupture those, the whole thing overheats and detonates." Rel nodded, not trusting himself to speak. As he worked, placing the charges one by one, he couldn't help but think about what would happen if they failed. What if the Drek found them before they escaped? What if this core didn't go critical? What if they just died up here, forgotten in orbit? Then he saw it. A small carving, scratched into the metal above the coolant valve. It wasn't Drek. It was human script, for Valari, for Umen, for Earth. Someone had been here before. Someone had tried this, and failed. Reel swallowed hard and placed the final charge. Marcus checked his timer. 2 minutes, move. They ran. The halls behind them screamed to life. Alarms, Drek sirens, blaring in low tones that made the walls vibrate. Go, 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 Marcus yelled. They reached the drop hatch and threw themselves through. The pilot was already pulling the ship away, the clamps disengaging as the cruiser began to shift, to convulse. Then came the explosion. The blast ripped upward through the center of the Drek cruiser like a spear of light, shattering its spine and sending the entire behemoth into a death roll. Fire burst from its core, and within seconds, the warship split in half, raining molten wreckage across the sky. From the ground, it looked like a new sun had been born. Inside the dropship, no one spoke. They didn't need to. They had done the impossible, and the message was clear. Humanity had arrived. And they were not here to beg. They were here to win. The wreckage of the Drek cruiser burned for hours in the upper atmosphere, a long, smoking trail streaking across the heavens like a warning written in fire. Every Zalari still breathing looked up at that trail and felt something they hadn't felt in a long, long time. Vengeance and hope. Back on the surface, the news spread faster than the flames. Across shattered villages and hiding places in mountain caverns, survivors heard the same story repeated again and again. The humans boarded a siege cruiser and destroyed it from the inside. Not damaged, not escaped. Destroyed. Rel became a symbol almost overnight. Not because he wanted to be, but because he had survived. Because he had fought. The Zalari weren't used to stories like this. They were used to loss, to surrender. They didn't tell tales of heroes anymore. They didn't have any. But now they had one. They had many. Still, the victory didn't bring peace. The Drek reeled from the loss, yes, but they didn't retreat. Instead, they doubled down. They were furious, shocked, and suddenly aware that this new species, the humans, weren't like the others they had crushed before. The retaliation came swift and merciless. 3 days after the cruiser's destruction, the Drek began bombing refugee zones, not military targets, civilians, sick and injured, children, elders, entire caves reduced to red mist in seconds. The humans responded with airstrikes, surgical raids, intel hacks that exposed Drek locations. It became a war of escalation, and every time the Drek turned crueler, the humans turned deadlier. One night, in a crater-turned command post outside what used to be Zalari's second-largest city, Marcus stared silently at a wall filled with names, humans and Zalari alike. Some were scribbled on scraps of metal, others etched directly into stone. All of them dead. Rel approached, his armor still marked with black soot from the last skirmish. He didn't speak at first. He just stood there, beside Marcus, watching the wind blow ash across the names. "We're losing too many," Marcus said finally. Rel nodded. "But we're not only losing anymore." Marcus's jaw flexed. "Yeah, still. The Drek don't know how to lose. They'll raze this planet before they admit defeat." Rel looked at him. "Then we don't give them the choice." Marcus turned to him slowly. "You thinking what I think you're thinking?" Rel's voice was steady. "We take the fight to them." There was a silence between them. Thick, electric. Then Marcus gave a cold, wolfish grin. "You Zalari sure know how to light a fire." Within a week, the plan took shape. Strike teams, mixed squads of humans and Zalari fighters, would coordinate to sabotage the Drek infrastructure across the planet. Not hit-and-run raids anymore. Not desperation attacks, systematic destruction, power relays, communication hubs, shipyards, fuel depots. Every place the Drek thought was safe was suddenly a target. The humans called it the sweep. And in the middle of it, Rel became a commander, not by rank but by presence. He had bled with humans, burned with his own people, and walked through fire to see that cruiser fall. They listened to him now, even the humans. One mission stood out among them all. A key target, the Drek's orbital tether, a massive space-reaching structure that funneled resources directly to their high fleet in low orbit. If it fell, it would strand thousands of their reinforcements in space and cripple planetary coordination. But it was surrounded, guarded like a god. Marcus gathered the team in a burned-out cathedral at dusk. What remained of stained glass windows painted their armor in twisted colors as he laid the plan out. "Full assault's suicide," he said bluntly. "So we don't assault, we infiltrate. One team, small, fast, surgical." He looked at Relative. "You're leading it." Rel blinked. "Me?" "You've been in the fire with us. You know how they think now. You've seen the inside of their ships. You survived the cruiser. That's more than most generals back on Earth can say." Rel didn't know what to say, so he said nothing. Just nodded. The plan was madness. Get in through the supply tunnels, use stolen Drek codes from a previous hack, plant demolition charges on the tether's support columns, get out before it all comes down. Everyone knew the odds. But no one hesitated. They'd seen what happened when humans showed up. And now they were going to show the Drek what it meant to be human. And Zalari. Together, the tunnels leading to the Drek orbital tether were ancient and stinking, remnants of the first planetary drills the Drek had slammed into the ground decades ago when they began terraforming sections of Zalari's world for their own use. They were deep, dark, and filled with echoes of machinery that never stopped humming, like the heartbeat of something unnatural. Rel led the team through narrow passages, each member cloaked in adaptive camo suits that shimmered like liquid shadow. There were 5 of them, 3 humans, one other Zalari named Kesser, and Rel at the front. Every step closer to the tether's foundation made the air feel heavier, charged with static, like the whole place knew it wasn't supposed to be touched. They moved in silence, only their breathing and the faint buzz of scanners filling their ears. When they finally reached the first choke point, a corridor thick with heat sensors and motion trackers, Naya Kess disabled them with a small device no larger than her palm. The lights blinked and dimmed. A heartbeat later, the team slid through undetected. Past the main gate, the world opened up into a cavernous space. The tether's anchor sat in the center, rising like a giant spine of metal and malice straight up into the heavens. Blue light pulsed along its ridges. Thick coils of reinforced alloy wrapped around it, carrying raw energy between the planet and the Drek fleet above. It wasn't just a structure, it was alive, and it was feeding the war. Rel froze when he saw the guards. Drek sentinels, twice the size of a soldier, loaded with heavier weapons and cloaked in energy fields that shimmered purple with menace. There were 6 of them, positioned around the tether like statues. Kesser leaned close. "How do we get past them?" "We don't," Rel muttered, eyes scanning the environment. "We distract." Nia pulled something from her pack, a drone no larger than a spider. She tapped a command into her wrist. The drone crawled forward, scaling the wall silently. It reached a high, rusted catwalk, and then dropped something. A small metal ball. Clink. The sound echoed like a hammer in a cathedral. The sentinels turned, and the team moved. Rail and Kesser sprinted to the tether's support beams. Naya and the others peeled off to provide cover. Plasma bolts screamed past them as the Drek opened fire, lighting up the dark with streaks of deadly light. One of the humans took a bolt to the shoulder and went down hard. No scream, just a grunt. The other dragged him behind cover and returned fire without hesitation. Rel knelt under the massive support coil and attached the first charge. His hands moved fast now, not from fear, but from memory. He knew what he was doing. The war had taught him well. They planted 6 charges total, each one pulsing with a red light and a silent promise of collapse. But they weren't fast enough. The Sentinels adjusted, their programming adapted. One of them turned sharply and zeroed in on Rel's location. "Move!" Naya shouted, opening fire with a high-powered repeater. The beam slammed into the Sentinel's shield, staggering it but not stopping it. Rel ducked, rolled, and hit the last detonator into place. "We're good. Go!" The team pulled back fast, retreating through the tunnel just as the floor shook beneath their feet. Drek reinforcements had arrived, dozens of them. The walls screamed with klaxons. Bullets and plasma fire turned the narrow exit into a death corridor. Rel and Kesser covered the rear, laying down suppressive fire while the others sprinted for the extraction point. A Drek blade caught Kesser in the leg, dropping him with a cry. Rel turned back, eyes wild. "Get up!" Kesser tried, but the wound was too deep. His leg was nearly gone. "I'm not making it," he choked. "You have to go." Rel didn't move. "Detonation's on a timer," Kesser gasped. "Don't make this mean nothing." Rel hesitated, just for a moment. Then he grabbed Kesser's arm, slung it over his shoulder, and screamed into his comms. "We need medevac! I'm not leaving anyone behind!" Outside, the extraction shuttle hovered just above the dust, side doors open, bullets hammering its sides as Naya waved frantically. "Let's go! Let's go!" Rel burst from the tunnel seconds before the charges went off. The explosion was like a god roaring. The ground lifted beneath them. The tether's base erupted, sending shards of alien alloy hundreds of feet into the air. The great spine bent, slowly, painfully, before snapping at the mid-joint. The structure twisted as it fell, crashing across the landscape like a collapsing skyscraper from the stars. Above, hundreds of Drek ships flickered and dimmed, severed from their lifeline. The sky, for the first time in weeks, started to clear. Inside the shuttle, Kesser passed out from blood loss, but he was alive. Barely. Marcus's voice came through the radio a moment later. "You did it." Rel leaned back, shaking, covered in blood and dust. "No," he said softly. "We did." And the world, for one perfect second, felt like it might belong to the living again. The fall of the orbital tether sent shock waves, literal and figurative, across the entire planet. Every Drek system connected to it flickered. Ship coordination collapsed. Supplies stopped moving. Communication between their surface forces and orbital command was severed. The once invincible Drek war machine started to stutter like a giant bleeding out through 1,000 cuts, and for the first time in recorded history, the Drek retreated. Not strategically, not to regroup. They ran. Across cities that once bowed in silence, Zalari fighters poured out from hiding places, ambushing patrols. Human gunships swept overhead, laying fire down like divine retribution. Liberation zones bloomed like wildfire across the continents. Even the old Zalari elders, who had long abandoned the idea of resistance, took up arms to guard their villages. But victory didn't come easy. The Drek's desperation made them more reckless. They started targeting entire regions with viral bombs, leaving corpses bloated in their homes. Other units turned suicidal, strapping explosives to themselves and charging into camps. It became clear to Marcus, and to Rel, that this wouldn't end until they cut the head off the beast. And that head was General Vurak, the Drek warlord who had overseen the invasion from orbit. He hadn't left the planet since the war began. He was somewhere deep beneath the earth, in a fortress carved into the bones of a dead mountain, guarded by tech the humans hadn't cracked, and soldiers who didn't fear death. Rel stood at the war table in the new field command center, a former Drek prison camp now converted into a base. The air reeked of smoke and solder, and maps covered every inch of the walls. Marcus pointed at the mountain, labeled Drenzakal in trembling red ink. "He's there. That's where it ends." The room was quiet. No one said what they were all thinking. It was a suicide mission. The mountain was rigged with defense towers, plasma artillery, and kill corridors. It wasn't a base. It was a tomb waiting to be sealed shut behind anyone foolish enough to enter. But Marcus just said, "We go in. We kill Vurak. We rip out the rot." Rel looked across the room at the young Zalari fighters watching him. He had trained many of them himself in the weeks following the Tether's destruction. They were scared, yes, but they were angry. Determined. So he nodded. "I'll go." And like always, Marcus didn't try to stop him. He just said, "Then I'm going too." The assault on Drenzakal began at dawn. 12 dropships carrying the best of both human and Zalari forces skimmed the mountainside under low cloud cover. Cloaked drones flew ahead, disabling radar and mines. Anti-air turrets were jammed just long enough for the dropships to slip through. Rel rode in the lead ship, Kesser beside him, his leg now replaced with a cybernetic brace the humans had rushed to build for him. "You sure about this?" Kesser asked, tightening the strap on his rifle. "No," Rel replied. "But when has that ever stopped us?" They hit the ground fast and hard. The mountain shook with the opening barrage. Explosions rippled through the outer walls. Human EMP rounds knocked out half the defense grid in the first 2 minutes. But the Drek were waiting. Dozens of them, maybe hundreds, emerged from tunnels and bunkers, screaming, firing, bleeding as they fought. They didn't hold back. They didn't plan to survive. Rel fired until his hands ached. Plasma bolts singed the air inches from his face. One Zalari fighter beside him was blown in half. Another was stabbed by a Drek blade before even drawing her weapon. It was madness. But they kept moving forward, room by room, floor by floor, every step a new death sentence, until finally they reached the heart of the mountain. A vast chamber hollowed out by machines, with molten heat radiating from deep vents and a massive throne of black steel at its center. And there he was, General Vurak, twice the size of a normal Drek, armor like obsidian, eyes glowing with cruel intelligence. He rose slowly, deliberately, and spoke in a voice that shook the stone. "You think you've won?" he growled. "You insects have delayed the inevitable. We are eternal." Marcus stepped forward. "Eternal this, asshole." He opened fire. Vurak charged. The chamber erupted into chaos. Rel rolled aside just as the warlord's axe shattered the ground where he'd stood. Kesser threw a grenade that barely slowed the brute. Human soldiers flanked him, unloading full clips, most of it bouncing off his shielded body. Reel climbed a scaffold on the wall, grabbing a long-forgotten Drek rifle left by a fallen guard. He aimed for the warlord's back, where the armor plates curved and exposed a small gap between neck and shoulder. He fired. The shot hit. Vurak stumbled. Marcus rushed in, blades in both hands, and drove them deep into the wound. The Drek howled and spun, but Rel was already moving, leaping down, plasma knife in hand. He landed hard, right beside the warlord, and plunged the blade into Vurak's throat. There was a roar, a collapse, a scream, and then silence. Vurak fell. The war had turned. The fall of General Vurak did not echo across the stars the way it should have. It exploded. Within hours of his death, Drek command fractured. Their chain of leadership, so tightly wound around Vurek's absolute authority, crumbled like glass under pressure. Orders stopped flowing. Reinforcements froze in orbit. Ground units, stripped of coordination, began to scatter in confusion. Some fought to the last. Others abandoned their posts, hijacked ships, and fled. The humans didn't give them the chance. What followed wasn't a war. It was a purge. Strike teams swept across the planet with cold precision, targeting remaining pockets of resistance, dismantling what the Drek had spent decades building in weeks. Human warships once circling the atmosphere like sentinels now descended, dropping supplies, food, medical tech. They brought engineers, communication specialists, and diplomats. But more than that, they brought witnesses. The galaxy had seen the Drek as unchallengeable for generations. They had conquered countless worlds, erased entire species, broken empires. And now, one of those conquered races, with humanity at its side, had brought them to their knees. For the Zalari, it was liberation. For the Drek, it was humiliation. Rel stood on a high ridge above the plains of Vessen, where once a Drek command center had loomed. Now there was nothing but scorched soil and scattered bones. The wind blew calmly for the first time in years. No smoke, no gunships, just peace. Behind him, camps were being rebuilt. Zalari families returned to their ancestral homes. Children that had only known life underground came up and blinked at the sun for the first time. Human volunteers helped reconstruct towns brick by brick, and Marcus stood there beside him, arms crossed, armor traded in for a utility vest and worn boots. "You did it," Marcus said quietly. Reel chuckled under his breath. "You keep saying that, but it never felt like I did anything. Just survived." Marcus turned to him. "That's the point. Surviving is winning. You made them bleed. You made them run. You reminded the whole galaxy what a conquered race can do when someone fights with them instead of for them." Rel didn't reply right away. He watched as a young Zalari girl handed a piece of fruit to a human soldier, who smiled awkwardly and tried to eat it without knowing what it was. He smiled. "Maybe we finally stop calling it our planet or your army," Rel said. "Maybe from now on, we call it what it really is." Marcus raised an eyebrow. "And what's that?" "A shared victory." There was a long silence, broken only by the rustle of tents in the breeze. Then a low hum filled the air. In the sky above them, dozens of new ships emerged from the clouds. Not warships, not scouts, civilian carriers, medical cruisers, refugee transports, ships filled with the displaced, the wounded, the forgotten, people coming home. "Earth's opening the corridor," Marcus said. "Word got out. There are more like you, more survivors. Zalarian hiding across the sector. They're coming back." Rel's throat tightened. So many had died. So many names carved into stone, lost to plasma, disease, and fire. But this was the part no one had imagined. They won. The Drek were still out there, somewhere in the dark, still powerful, still cruel. But now they knew fear. Now they remembered pain. And now the galaxy remembered something it had long forgotten. When humans arrived, they didn't bring mercy. They brought fire, they brought resistance, they brought hell. But most of all, they brought hope. And hope, once ignited, was impossible to kill.